Okay, so a lot has been happening lately in the media sphere coverage of the Trump regime. The topic that I want to tackle in this particular episode is kind of attack via the Alien Enemies Act that he obviously has not applied in the correct manner. He ignored his administration. So I have a couple of articles that I kind of want to cite here. The first one is just kind of covering like the legality of the thing. Is what he's doing legal? Obviously, it is not. And it's being litigated through the court systems right now. The way that it's looking is that the Trump administration has absolutely they have no regard for the rule of law in the first place. Now it's just out there for everybody and Joe's mom to see. So it's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out through the legal system. Obviously, with Chief Justice John Roberts giving a pretty public rebuke of Trump, even though he didn't name him as Trump is prone to say. He didn't say my name. He didn't say my name, so I don't know anything about that. I'm hearing it now for the first time. It's just absolutely ridiculous. But with that, it kind of gives you a little bit of a glimmer of hope that maybe the legal system will prevail in this particular instance. But we've been steered wrong by this far right wing Supreme Court before. So honestly, anything that they do will not surprise me. So the first article I want to bring up, just again, like covering the legality of the thing, is from Reason.com. Pull up on the screen now. Most public debate over the Trump administration's efforts to use the Alien Enemies Act as a tool for deportation have focused on whether the invocation of the AEA is legal. The administration's apparent defiance of a court order blocking the deportation of some 137 Venezuelans under the act. These are important issues. Not enough attention is focused on what is being done to the Venezuelans after their deportation. They are to be incarcerated for 1 year or more in El Salvador's awful prison system. This is much worse than normal deportation of undocumented immigrants, which is bad enough. With conventional deportation, the government removes the migrants from the U.S., but then sets them free in their country of origin, or at least as free as they can be under the oppressive regimes that govern places like Venezuela. In this case, by contrast, deportees are sent to prison in terrible conditions, and that's without ever being charged or convicted of any crime relating to the ostensible reason for the deportation, supposed membership in the Trendy-Aragua drug gang. The migrants in question did not get any opportunity at all to contest claims that they are members of the TVA. All we have is the administration's unsupported word. The government actually admits that many of the deportees do not have any criminal convictions of any kind. Moreover, publicly, evidence suggests many of them are probably not actually gang members, and some even enter the U.S. legally. This policy is obviously unjust. Imprisoning people without any due process whatsoever is a cruel and evil practice, usually used only by authoritarian states. And if the Trump administration gets away with it here, there's an obvious danger it will expand the practice. While the current AEA proclamation is limited to Venezuelan members of the Trendy-Aragua, if courts uphold it, could potentially be expanded to other Venezuelans and migrants from other countries. And of course, as already noted, the administration isn't given any due process rights to those targeted for AEA deportation, which enables it to deport people simply by claiming they are gang members, even if they really aren't. I am for the rule of law. Do I think there's a proper way to come into this country legally? Well, yes, I do. Of course I do. And especially if you're a member of a gang committing terroristic acts and flooding the U.S. with drugs, I believe you should be held accountable to the fullest extent of the law and deported back to your country of origin. But to subject humans to these concentration camps, that's effectively what they are in El Salvador. You can Google those conditions. The flip way that the leader of El Salvador speaks about just really anything in general. He's a very condescending, pretty cocky person. It's absolutely unacceptable. And we in the United States should be held to a higher standard, especially higher standards than authoritarian regimes, which, let's be real, that's what the Trump administration wants to be, is an authoritarian regime. I will cover more on martial law in my next video. So the next article I want to cite, it's a very powerful, take on just one of these stories that can be covered involving the unlawful taking of a human being. I'm just going to jump into it because it really speaks for itself. This here from Philip Bolsinger with Time. On the night of Saturday, March 15th, 3 planes touched down in El Salvador, carrying 261 men deported from the United States. A few dozen were Salvadorian, but most of the men were Venezuelans the Trump administration had designated as gang members and deported with little or no due process. I was there to document their arrival. For more than a year, I have been embedded through El Salvador society, working on a book chronicling the country's transformation. From the huts of remote island fishermen to the desk of the president, from elite homicide detective units to elementary school classrooms, I have interviewed government officials and everyday people, collecting stories that would shock Stephen King. I stood in classrooms full of happy students which not long ago were empty. Because children here once learned early that schools were places to be raped or recruited. I've interviewed killers in prison and sat with them face to face. As I stood on the tarmac, an agent with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security's ICE Special Response Team told me that some of the Venezuelans had weakly attempted to take over their plane upon landing. It wasn't unusual for detainees to try to make a last stand, the agent said, guarding the doorway to the plane at the top of the gangway stairs. They began to try to organize to overthrow the plane by screaming for everyone to stand up and fight. But not everyone was on board, the agent said, cautioning me to be careful because some of the Venezuelans would fight once they were overboard. Even if not fighting, almost all the detainees came to the door of the plane with angry, defiant faces. It was their faces that grabbed me, because within a few hours, those faces would be completely transformed. The Venezuelans emerging from their plane were not in prison clothes, but in designer jeans and branded tracksuits. Their faces were the faces of guys who in no way expected what they first saw, an ocean of soldiers and police, an entire army assembled to apprehend them. One of the alleged organizers of the attempted overthrow fought the U.S. agents on the plane, cursing the Americans, the Salvadorans, President Nayib Bukele himself. El Salvador's Minister of Defense, Rene Moreno, who had been standing on the tarmac at the bottom of the gangway, rushed aboard, dragged the guy to the gangway himself, and flung him into the waiting hands of black masked guards. The transfer from the plane to the buses that would carry them to the prison was rapid, yet it might as well have been the crossing of an ancient continent. I felt the detainees' fear as they marched through a gauntlet of black-clad guards, guns raised like the spears of some terrible tribe. I walked the line of buses waiting to depart, photographing faces. A guard noticed one of the detainees turned toward the window and wrenched his head back down into his chest. Around 2 a.m., the convoy of 22 buses, flanked by armored vehicles and police, moved out of the airport. Soldiers and police lined the 25-mile route to the prison, with thick patrols at every bridge and intersection. For the few Salvadorans, it was a familiar landscape. But a Venezuelan plucked from America, unless it appeared dystopian. Police and soldiers for miles and miles in woodland darkness. The Terrorism Confinement Center, a notorious maximum security prison known as CCOT, sits in an old farm field at the foot of an ancient volcano, brightly lit against the night sky. I've spent considerable time there and know the place intimately. As we entered the intake yard, the head of prisons was giving orders to an assembly of hundreds of guards. He told them the Venezuelans had tried to overthrow their plane, so the guards must be extremely vigilant. He told them plainly, show them they are not in control. The intake begins with slaps. One young man sobbed when a guard pushed him to the floor. He said, I'm not a gang member. I'm gay. I'm a barber. I believed him. Maybe it's only because he didn't look like what I expected. He wasn't a tattooed monster. Men were pulled from the buses so fast the guards couldn't keep pace. Chained at their ankles and wrists, they stumbled and fell, some guards falling to the ground with them. With each fall came a kick, a slap, a shove. Guards grabbed necks and pushed bodies into the sides of the buses as they forced the detainees forward. There was no blood, but the violence had rhythm, a theater of fear. Inside the intake room, a sea of trustees descended on the men with electric shavers, stripping heads of hair with haste. The guy who claimed to be a barber began to whimper, holding his hands in prayer as his hair fell. He was slapped. The man asked for his mother, and then buried his face in his chained hands and cried as he was slapped again. After being shaved, the detainees were stripped naked. More of them began to whimper. The hard faces I saw on the plane had evaporated. It was like looking at men who passed through a time machine. In 2 hours, they aged 10 years. Their nice clothes were not gathered or cataloged, but simply thrust into black garbage bags to be thrown out with their hair. They entered their cold cells, 80 men per cell, steel planks for bunks, no mats, no sheets, no pillow, no television. No books, no talking, no phone calls, and no visitors. For these Venezuelans, it was not just a prison they had arrived at. It was exile to another world, a place so cold and far from home that they may as well have been sent into space, nameless and forgotten. Holding my camera, it was as if I watched them become ghosts. That's just one story. However, his name is Andres. You can watch the Midas Touch Network's covering of this. They really put together a lot of the puzzle pieces and figuring out where he went, because Andreas was not given due process. He was scheduled. He had a case scheduled because he's an asylum seeker. They didn't let him show for that. They disappeared him. One of his brothers. To an El Salvadorian concentration camp. I'm all for rule of law, but I'm also not for subjecting people to concentration camps. And I try my best not to curse on this channel, but this is fucking kidnapping. And we should be better than this. I'll cover more stories like this as they come. We are walking into a very uncertain future, and basic human rights and due process are being violated in the most disgusting manner possible. But it's important that we highlight these stories, because we need to show this authoritarian regime for exactly what the hell they are. A group of cowards. Standing behind an army of jackbooted stormtroopers. The more we bring attention to these things, the more pressure can be put on this regime. Because there's strength in unity. and we will resist for the future. I am Justice Rossetti.